first question obviously was women soldiers in UN peace operations, but that's not the only thing that the armed forces do, right? So you interrogate or you ask men and women, and those people have been deployed to UN peace operations, but also maybe EU or NATO engagements. So for us, it was really interesting that those findings were not only attributable to gender questions and not only attributable to UN peace operations. For example, household constraints. Men and women alike are not at home to foster parents or take care of children, etc. And they both raised that this can be a huge challenge for them. And also when German armed forces deploy to EU or NATO engagements, they are away from the family. However, of course, the UN deployments are for a much longer time, so the barrier was stronger with regard to this. We had quite a challenge to get all this information because we started sending out the questionnaire in February 2020. And if you remember well, this was the start of the COVID pandemic. So for us it was kind of hard to reach all the soldiers everywhere. We had to do 3 iterations before everybody filled in the form that we required. But let's say we were successful in the end. We found 12 barriers and 7 MOWIP issue areas. And I won't discuss them for too long because the summary is online and you can find it on the German MOD's website. But we can definitely say that the greatest barrier was a lack of information about deployment possibilities to UN peace operations, and that the eligible pool of trained women for UN peace operations is and still remains just too small. Women were able to join all ranks and positions in the German armed forces only in 2001. And since then, they had to get up to the ranks that you need as military observers and staff officers, and this takes time. So I already mentioned that we took measures such as the orders from the Chief of Defense to increase the numbers, and we were very happy that we didn't find any barriers with regard to training or skills, because we see that Germany as a champion in training and capacity building is very good in this regard, but we were more concerned about the social cultural barriers that take so much longer to surpass. For instance, one barrier we found is that women had the feeling they have to convince their male colleagues of their capabilities to perform, or that sometimes in a mission environment they got very stereotypical tasks that were assigned to them. So this will take much longer, but when we found those results through the analysis, we presented it to the minister's hierarchy and we made some sort of internal action plan on how to tackle them. And the focus lies on information dissemination, as you also said in Uruguay, and the training aspect. So I already mentioned those 2 orders. We also plan an information campaign. At the moment, we're not progressing as fast as we can due to a lack of personnel, but we had a similar idea of having teams that go throughout Germany, throughout the different places where the armed forces are stationed, and then we would do a general briefing about UN peacekeeping deployments for all genders, and then smaller sections, smaller workshops by women, for women, so that they have the safe space to ask questions. The third measure I would like to mention is that during the staffing conferences that take place every several months to see which personnel deploys to missions, they were really sensitized to the barrier assessment that they have to deploy more women, that they have to identify more women in the first place. And regularly, we as the Ministry of Defense sit in those meetings and kind of reaffirm this message, but they have been very good in this regard, and they try to really bring forward more women. And the last point I would like to make is also general training. For example, our higher command and staff course has a UN module, and in this UN module, my colleagues and me have been presenting the findings of the barrier assessment and also the challenges and why Germany does such a barrier assessment, so that the future generation of leaders bears this in mind and can also inspire the next generation. Thank you. would like to first and foremost thank Bangladesh, Canada and Uruguay for organizing this preparatory conference, and we would also like to thank Ghana for making this a priority topic at the upcoming Peacekeeping Ministerial. As a representative from the German government, I look forward to discussing possible pledges with everybody here today and tomorrow. And to answer your question, Leroy, Germany was a non-permanent Security Council member in 2019-2020. And as you mentioned, in April when we had the monthly chair in the Security Council, we said that when we organize open debate on women in peacekeeping, we not only want to discuss, but we also want to bring forward very concrete actions. We want to be a leader in this and also maybe enable others in following suit, especially with regard to implementing the United Nations Uniform Gender Parity Strategy that USG mentioned earlier. So what we did was twofold. We looked at how could Germany enable other member states in meeting the criteria, and what can we do ourselves? And Germany has been inviting women peacekeepers to Germany for training. Currently, for instance, there's a course taking place with 26 women peacekeepers from many UN member states that came to Germany and that are being trained as military observers in our peacekeeping training center. Then Germany also decided to fund the ELSI initiative through the ELSI Initiative Fund, and is a proud supporter through this. And as the USG mentioned earlier, we also took the initiative to pilot a uniform peacekeepers network. All this to help other TCCs to meet the targets. And then we said, what can Germany do? Our numbers were not the best, and they still aren't, and we're open about this. We have a 30% ratio of women in the armed forces, and currently with regard to troops, we stand at 8%. With regard to military observers and staff officers, we stand at 9%. So you can see we still have to do our homework. But we said that with 2 orders of our Chief of Defense, we want to make sure that more women get deployed in peace operations. And we had then women say, okay, raise their hands and say, okay, I want to do the training as a military observer. I want to deploy in mission. And the best example I always have is that after this order of the day that the child, one woman came to us and said, okay, I want to be trained. She deployed to UNMISS for 1 year, and she liked it so much that now she raised her hand for 2 years, and now she will go to South Sudan for 2 years. And we feel that this has been a really good encouragement from the leadership. So the leadership also decided to do a barrier assessment, and that was your question in the beginning. We thought that when we saw the LC baseline study and the draft of the MOWIP, that was such a good idea to have the same language and this comparability, that regardless of who the TCC is, if we come from Latin America, Asia, Africa, Europe, we speak the same language with regard to opportunities and barriers. And this is what Germany said, even if we're not applying for the LC fund and to do projects ourselves, we will analyze where our challenges lie and then share it with the other member states. And that's exactly what happened in 2021, that we presented our results at the UN and that we published our summary of the findings in 3 languages, and that we always stand ready to share our experience with other member states. Why did we share those results? It's 3 answers to this. We first and foremost obviously wanted to incentivize other member states to do the same. Because when you have the evidence-based research, when you have data, you can make a much stronger argument, and it's much easier to then implement consecutive actions. And the second reason is that we wanted to open up about challenges that we face. And the third question would be that we wanted to broaden the research related, the information base. As you said, researchers are looking into it, the ELSI initiative is working into it, and then it's maybe easier to compare where the member states stand. Thank you very much.
For the sake of time. Well, the first thing we got from the MOWIP assessment was a diagnosis on the barriers and opportunities for the increasing of the participation of women to peacekeeping operation. We have now research evidence on those barriers and how they impacted on the Uruguayan armed forces. It was very important that the barriers and opportunities, especially the barriers, were to the impact they had, because it showed us how to prioritize our strategies and actions to mitigate those barriers. The assessment also contributed to and became a valuable information and tool to consolidate the Uruguayan first national plan on women, peace and security, which we have been working for a couple of years. And then when the MOWIP report information came out, we had another asset that became part of our national action plan on women, peace and security, released in 2021. And then, more recently, it gave us the opportunity to apply and then to have now the ongoing project with the LC Fund on strategies and actions to increase the meaningful participation of women, which focuses on the participation of women in military contingents, especially in missions with a POC mandate, protection of civilian mandate, which in our case is related to MONUSCO in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Our project, which is ongoing, as I mentioned in the opening session, since October 2022, aims at mitigating the barriers, making good use of the opportunities identified in the study, and we selected 3 high barriers according to the MOWIP report, and we developed strategies and actions to mitigate those barriers. And there is one medium barrier that was also selected because it was especially important to us, which was deployment criteria, because it is really linked to the eligible pool of women to peacekeeping operation, which we are really interested in focusing in that area. So I could mention many aspects of the results of the project in connected with the process of the implementation of the MOWIP report and the process of design of our project with the Uruguayan Armed Forces, and how closely and how fluidly we had worked with the LC Fund, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is an important step towards this whole process, working together. But I will mention a couple of the action of the strategies that are undergoing with our project. For instance, we are implementing a family support policy for children of women who are willing to deploy, who apply to deploy to peacekeeping operation, and they are therefore deployed. And this benefit is also extensive to men in monoparental homes. And we also have this particular strategy is aimed at mitigating the gender roles barrier identified in the MOWIP report. We have also developed a systemic study, which will be ongoing in the following months. A systemic study on the barriers, contextualized to the Uruguayan reality, our society, and the Uruguayan Armed Forces organization as such. And we have organized mobile information and evaluation teams that go around the country to disseminate information on criteria for deployment scenarios and opportunities for women to deploy. This activity is not only aimed at women, but it also there are also men in the military involved, because the MOWIP report showed us that there was a lack of information, real information on the criteria or scenario or skills required to deploy to peacekeeping operation. And especially in women, this meant that they self-excluded from the process of applying to a peacekeeping operation. And let me tell you that the primary results of these activities that we have undertaken in the past few months, has been really successful, because our project has constant monitoring and evaluation, especially following up on the activities. And the primary results showed us that the percentage of women volunteering to deploy to peacekeeping operations is rather higher than the percentage of women who are currently deployed. So the primary results allows us to be really optimistic on the result of the project with these specific activities that we have implemented in the few months. And finally, as a TCC and PCC to UN peacekeeping operations, we have been part of the evolution on peacekeeping and how the inclusion of women in our contingents, especially in our military contingents, has contributed to better performance of our troops on the ground. So our first military women deployed to peacekeeping operations in 1992 as part of a military contingent in Africa, in the African contingent. And since then, the participation of women in the military, especially in the military, has fluctuated from 3% to 8 or 9%, which in general terms is quite an important average participation in the military at the UN level. But yet, we were clearly aware that over decades of participation of women in peacekeeping operations, there was something that was showing us that the trend was stuck in that 3 or 8%. So we were fully aware that we needed to continue our efforts to increase the participation of women. The meaningful participation of women for us is especially on the ground. So we are good in numbers on military staff officers and military observers, but we are really devoting efforts to increase meaningful participation in troops on the ground, which we think a real difference can be made. So when our government, by means of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, received the invitation to be part of the LC initiative and the MOWIP assessment back in 2019, we saw that as an excellent opportunity to give a great step towards finding more evidence and information on possible barriers for the increasing of women in peace operations. So why was it important to us? First, because we were honored to receive the invitation for our trajectory as a TCC to peacekeeping operations, and especially as being the first country in terms of contribution of female personnel to UN operations in our contingent in the Americas. And because we had some observations and we had been studying the factors that possibly could explain that lack of increasing in numbers. So when we entered our participation in the LC initiative, the MOWIP methodology offered us the opportunity to move from these observations that we had to a set of clearly identified and assessed barriers and opportunities for the meaningful participation of women in peace operations. And it allowed us to measure the impact that these barriers and opportunities have in our Uruguayan armed forces and the police. It was a methodology that was specifically designed to these purposes, which we found really interesting and innovative. So it marks us the way to further strategies and actions, and one of these is the participation of Uruguay with a morality project in the LC Fund. We applied with the information we received from the MOWIP report, among other aspects. We applied to a project morality, which is now ongoing, and which I will now let you know later. So in conclusion, it was really important to us because it gave us the opportunity to continue developing strategies to increase the meaningful participation of women. We knew that we had to do more efforts in this sense, and we found in the MOWIP methodology a way to starting from the evidence that could be also shared with other countries, because we have a common language in terms of barriers and opportunities now. We have a valuable asset to continue working in this sector.
With international personnel as the two most necessary skills for successful peacekeeping operations, with combat skills as the third most necessary. So what this tells us is that fit for the future peacekeeping operations require peacekeepers that have skills related to communications like listening, empathy, de-escalation, and mediation techniques. And women, because of socialization, may be more likely than men to have these communication and interpersonal skills. So the recommendation to address this finding is that international policy and practice should establish deployment criteria that reflect all the skills and knowledge needed. This involves equally prioritizing a range of combat and contact skills and providing training in both areas, including testing and assessment, and making sure that all of this is determined at the national context based on objective assessment data. Second, and one of the most profound findings, in my opinion, is that the data reveals a link between holding rigid ideas about gender roles, what it means.
Thank you for asking. Tailoring the MOWIP for local context has been integrated into the methodology, and it's one of the most important functions of the methodology. While it is a universal instrument that provides us with common language across TPCCs, it has become increasingly clear that the MOWIP experience can and should look different for each country undertaking that assessment. So, for example, in a recent meeting in a lessons learned workshop that we had a few weeks ago in Istanbul, a local implementer from the Jordan police noted that one of the reasons they thought their MOWIP assessment was so successful is because of the flexibility of the process in terms of its capacity to adapt the MOWIP assessment to the local context. So there's often this assumption that the MOWIP might be rigid, and while we do stand by the academic integrity and the statistical robustness of the MOWIP, there are plenty of opportunities to tailor it to the local and cultural context throughout implementation. And there are 5 primary ways, so hopefully I won't take too long, but I'm going to go through them because I think they're very important, and I'm going to go through them in the order that they arise for the implementing country. So first and foremost, in the planning phase of every MOWIP assessment, you get to pick the local research partner that's going to coordinate the data collection, and that is like the first opportunity that the country has to tailor the MOWIP assessment to their cultural context. And it really, in selecting this research institution, you can set yourself up for success in tailoring it to the local context, because you want to look for a research partner that can not only meet the technical demands of the MOWIP, but also has this knowledge of the local security sector within the culture, within that local security sector, the culture of the country as a whole, and is able to build that into the assessment process during execution. And so that's, from the outset, one of the primary ways that we tailor the MOWIP is by working within country with these local research institutions that have the knowledge and experience to implement it. The second, and arguably the most important way that we contextualize the MOWIP is during our localization workshop, and this is built into the methodology as well. And so this is when Cornell and DCAF sit with the local partners, and we can sit with essentially any stakeholder that might be important to be represented to have input into the MOWIP assessment. And we go through the MOWIP data collection instruments, like the survey, line by line, response option by response option, and we make sure that the security forces and the stakeholders have a chance to provide their input on each and every question that is going to be implemented in the MOWIP. And we try our best to work with the local country to tailor it to their country context. So for example, in a localization workshop, it might become necessary for cultural or contextual appropriateness to remove questions altogether, to change the wording a few times, and so that's a process that we're very committed to ensure that the survey instruments work for the context that they are being fielded in. The third opportunity is during data collection, and so data collection really is the backbone of the MOWIP assessment for identifying these barriers, and so the people doing the data collection, the enumerators that are conducting the surveys on the ground, that are talking to the military officers or police officers to get this information, are critical for ensuring the cultural adaptability as well. So for instance, in some countries like in Jordan, they picked enumerators that were best fit for their context, and so they picked university students that were recruited for the duration of the assessment to implement the MOWIP assessment because they felt that would be the most appropriate for their context. In other countries like Sierra Leone, they prioritized hiring female enumerators because the local research partners thought that that would be most appropriate. In Mexico, they used non-uniformed officers from a different branch to conduct the interviews because they thought that would be most appropriate in their context. So we at Cornell and DCAF can have conversations about selecting the right enumeration team that is that perfect medium between culturally competent and technically competent as well. The last two, and I will try to be quick with these, is during the pilot. So the pilot is essentially, once we've created this instrument that is tailored to the local context with the in-country teams, we test it. So we go out and we test it with a smaller group of respondents, and we take a look at all of the data that comes back. And what we do is we look at the data to see if there are any inconsistencies, any sensitive questions that are arising. For instance, if there's a question that perhaps the respondents might not feel comfortable answering, we go back, we take a look at the data, and then we make edits to the instrument accordingly to make sure that it is as culturally appropriate as possible. And finally, the last opportunity that I'd like to discuss is during reporting and validation. So when the project is finally complete, when we've done the assessment, we've talked to everybody, we go through the data and we typically work with the research partners in country to review all of the findings, all of the numbers that we've gotten to develop a report. And this collaboration of going back and forth with the local team and the Cornell lab, even comparing our translations, it's all to ensure this cultural contextualization and to ensure that we are analyzing the results in the most appropriate and effective way. And finally, and almost very importantly, is the validation workshop. And so once we have created the report with an in-country local partner, we present the results to the security institution, who has the opportunity to review the analysis in depth, elaborate on good practices, develop recommendations, and make any edits to the report that they deem either culturally required or to be removed or edited for security purposes. So those are just some of the ways that we